Perfect.
Hi, Felipe.
Hi, MD.
I'm so glad we're doing this.
Me too. Second time around.
Yes, in fact, I'm just in the interview in general
Oh,
too.
yeah. Yes.
So what Felipe is talking about is our mentorship, which is coming up, which is perfect. It's perfect.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about that a little bit after our conversation, and I'll just for everyone that's listening, I want to like have a conversation with you, talk about all the wonderful things that we do together, all wonderful aspects of you and your practice, so that I know you so well and I get so much from our relationship and collaborations. And I just want to share that with everyone a little bit as much as you want to share. So,
Yeah.
without further ado, let's get started with my questions. So, who are you? Where are you? How are you? No, just kidding. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you came to a yoga practice to begin with.
My name is Felipe Gonzalez, and I am right now currently in Santa Monica, California. And the journey that got me there, I was originally born in Bogota, Colombia, but my family immigrated to the States when I was 3, and we moved to Northeast Ohio, which is where my mom is from and her family. And I grew up in the Midwest, and I was a performer at heart. I came into this world singing and dancing, and I've never stopped. And I've always been interested in movement and really the art of storytelling through song and dance. And so I fell into a performing career, studied that in college, moved to New York, did that for like 8 years, and it just really started to wear and tear on me. And when I moved to the city, I picked up a yoga practice because I had joined a New York sports club and I saw people doing yoga, and I was like, oh, this would be a great like addition to my flexibility and keeping my body in shape for dance auditions. And there was something about the practice that was so regulating to me that it became a ritual before and sometimes after an audition. I would go and practice to help get myself centered. So when I decided I wanted to move away from performing, I thought about like, what do I want to do? And I was like, well, I love yoga. And I was like, well, I could teach yoga, and I could live anywhere in the world and do that. So I decided to do my teacher training, which you were one of the lead trainers at. And in that initial 200-hour teacher training, I just had this insight where I was like, oh my God, this would be a career path that utilizes everything I'm good at, all of these skills I have. But instead of telling somebody else's story, I get to share my personal story. And that really was the launching pad into my exploration as a movement practitioner and as a yoga practitioner and a yoga teacher. And so I've been practicing and learning for the last 10 years now, which is, I can't believe it seems like no time has passed, and I feel like I've been doing it forever. But I love to learn and I love to continue to share and teach with people because, you know, as a Zen saying says, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And the more that I am sharing and teaching other people, I in turn have to do that myself so that I'm really coming from an embodied and authentic place. And so I'm continuously learning, evolving, growing. And I think within the last 3 years, I had this realization that you don't have to like in with one and out with the other. You really start to put it all together and create a technique and a real perspective and voice that's uniquely your own. And I think that is the most valuable thing you can get as being a teacher, is really like coming from a place of lived experience so that that is the basis of what you're sharing and offering.
And just so everyone knows, what was the training and what kind of,
Oh,
that's a no, that's fine. No, no. I mean, perfect. That was so beautiful and so poignant. And I have a follow up, but just let us know what
yeah.
kind of training.
So initially it was a 200-hour teacher training at a studio that's no longer in New York. It was called Laughing Lotus, which is where I met Mary Dana, and I loved the philosophy at the time and the freedom in expression and movement, which is what I was really drawn towards. I felt like it really spoke to like the artist in me, and I did my 500-hour through Laughing Lotus. Although very quickly, right after my 200 hours, when I took my first Katonah Yoga class, at the time there was a Katonah Yoga studio in Chelsea. And so I started exploring the theory and the material of Katonah Yoga really soon after my initial 200 hour. And for 4 or 5 years, kept at it until did the formal like process of getting certified. And I have to say that while I do draw upon a lot of different movement modalities and techniques, the foundation of really everything that I share is Katonah Yoga,
Mhm.
um, which I think is such a great lens and framework to incorporate to what you already know. And I think that, again, speaking to that insight of being able to put everything together and use all the techniques that you have in your toolbox to help keep yourself self-regulated so that you can help your students stay self-regulated and in turn foster communal well-being, which I think is like such an important aspect of teaching. You know,
Mhm.
you are really cultivating space and working with multiple bodies and multiple different kinds of energy to really uplift the collective consciousness.
Yeah. No, I'm in total agreement with you. And going back to something you said before, and I love hearing this through your words, just say kind of, you don't have to throw out anything when we learn new things and techniques. In fact, like I think it's a hallmark of a good teacher that they continue to seek out knowledge and aren't afraid to have their beliefs and systems and ways of doing things challenged, and continually. And I think that that's a really important piece. And what I love about the theory is that it allows us to know that how we look at a certain thing is our frame of reference, and there are different ways to look at that same thing. And what we see as true, what someone else sees as true. And for a teacher, I think that can be overwhelming because I think, like, as teachers, we feel like we have to be right and, and convey a certain sense of pliancy with our nimbleness with our skill set. And I think the missing piece with that pliancy and nimbleness is that to be nimble and pliant, you have to be buoyant and not be so linear and see things from different perspectives. So on that note, what do you what were like the do you remember like the first things that kind of were like, oh my God, this is so amazing when you started taking Katonah yoga classes? Do you remember like what really piqued your curiosity?
I mean, the first, experience was effort and the realization of how upper body oriented I am and so much of the vinyasa practice is. And while like I pride myself on having great legs and I was a dancer and was very flexible, so I was used to using my lower body, but really understanding how to substantiate with the lower body. That was a huge insight for me and the realization of how I wasn't doing it, with really simple things of doing a dog with your forearm behind your back, like I would completely topple over. And 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 in that idea of putting your brain in your lower body in a lot of ways, like that's how I started to show up in life, about really understanding how to substantiate, how to ground and really find foundations so that I felt safe, and stable. And for me, that was like the biggest insight and the biggest interest, and what I wanted to explore more. Because I remember, like, having yoga teachers, because I was really good at the standing posture series, but anything that where it came to like folding and hip opening, like I struggled with. And I would have teachers just be like, oh, that's just not in your lifetime,
Mm,
and I know they meant that with the best of intentions, but that was really disempowering to hear, to be like, oh, you're just never going to be capable of doing this, when it's really, no, you need to relearn how to use your lower body. And once lotus variations became available, I was like, oh, well, the proof is in the pudding.
mm.
This is what I need to really study and continue to explore.
Yes, I mean, it's so interesting, and that I think is just a perfect example about a personal story of seeing things differently in the same body, right? And like having a bunch of insights from that, and it opening up possibilities in the physical practice, which is just to be, neither of us think that's the goal, right? Because it's the insights that you have, and the insights that you have can be accessed through many different perceived, I think, levels of practice, right?
Yeah.
In terms of like, oh, this is advanced, or how we use different describers to organize asana. I think like these practices are also so potent and powerful because they're able to work simply and effectively too, right? Like, it wasn't like it was just like, okay, everything you do is different, right? It's like, yes, there are differences in the way that things are, done and taught in Katonah Yoga, bending the knees and such in down dog, or, playing with three-legged dog in the arms instead of the legs, because that means it really puts you in your legs, but it's the same shapes looked at through a different lens. And I think the lens is also both the invitation to see it as a frame of reference, to see that what you see is a snapshot, allows us to also entertain that in that same moment, there's a lot of different angles. So, by virtue of that, we are setting ourselves up for a more three-dimensional experience.
Yes. And the realization that everything is in constant motion, right? And so that reference and that framework is going to be constantly changing, because every time you look at it, the moment is different, and then there's new information. And that is I think from like being in the lower body was the first interest, the simplicity in how the practice is executed really was the next kind of like aha thing for me, because I moved away from fancy tricky sequencing, and really the grace and the beauty was how functional and in many ways rudimentary the movement is. But when it becomes so unlabored, so effervescent and free, it's like, oh my God, why would you want to try to do anything else? Because that feels so good,
Mhm.
and like the fact that like it's always changing, I think that like this idea of stability is really, as Naveen says, being dynamic, about being able to like put yourself in the middle and understand the middle is always in motion,
Right.
and that is kind of piggybacking off of what you said before. It's like when new information is presented to you, being able to like change your basis, otherwise you're just then living in biasy, and
Hmm.
the refusal to accept what's in front of you, which I get really mad when other people do it, so why do I get to do it?
Isn't that interesting though? Like, the refusal to accept it coincides with it also being the only thing you allow yourself to see.
Yeah.
Like that, there's this. things in being in motion and mediation being a movement practice is like there's always you always have to take into account context, right? And I think that that was a big theme of our mentorship last year was context is consciousness, and I'm sure it'll weave its way in. But and that's I think also, I don't like to say this is missing, this is missing. Everyone has a lot of investment in what they've learned and what they put out there. And but what I think sometimes is, now I'm going to say that like gives me the permission to say this, right? What I think sometimes is missing from some modern postural practices with, and there's a lot of good intention there, is context. Even with sometimes these like absolutisms in cueing, like, oh, you should engage the glutes, you should not engage the glutes, you should widen your hands for a carrying angle, you should not, all these like different things. And like what's missing in a lot of those conversation is context, like where the body is meeting the posture, and different bodies meet postures at different points, right?
Yes.
And this is like the movement's always move, the moment and the movement is always moving. The movement is always
Always
moving.
moving.
It was just such a great quote, so poignant.
Write that one down. Write that one down.
So different people will have to maybe do things differently. And I think that's sometimes misunderstood about Katonah Yoga, because we use geometry and angles, but it's really to have a framework so that you can give the same information and people can figure out what they need in a
Yes.
particular moment, because we're giving a framework for it.
Yes.
Right. So it's absolutely, I think, less about conformity and more about information.
Yeah.
And how we embody, like you were saying before, it's not just in our yoga mats, it really affects how we then interact in the communal spaces that we live in. And I feel you have something to say, something.
No, I mean, it's also empowering because it gives the practitioner agency. It
Yeah,
gives the teacher agency because these are the tools, right?
right,
And everybody's using the same tools, right? Everybody's using the same maps, but everybody's having their own individual experience, and mediation is personal, right? So you use these tools that everybody's using, but you mediate it in the way that puts you in a state of equanimity, you in a state of balance, and you as a teacher to help people do that. If like somebody, like we were talking earlier, if like somebody's always, in hyperextension, like they need something that's going to help rein them in, and some of the like common pedestrian or habitual patterns of motion that we see in a lot of students isn't an absolute, right? Like sometimes that's not going to be the right tool for everybody.
right,
And
right,
knowing both as a teacher and as a practitioner which tools to use when and how, because like at first you got to learn a rule, right? It's like
right.
you learn rules, but then there comes a point where you start using the rules, where you allow your experience, your insight, and your intuition at that point to help guide how you're using the rules. But first you got to learn them first before you just start like
Right.
intuitively feeling your way.
Right. And I think
I've
that's
never done this before, but I'm going to trust my intuition.
that's exactly, I think that's what it is. It's like our intuition can be both a very powerful tool, but it can be very misleading if we
Yes.
don't like understand the dynamics of our own personal habits and what we get pulled into, and how we can be like self-delusional, and to recognize that stuff is actually very empowering. It's not disempowering, because then
Yes.
then we know how the tools we need in the moment, that we're, where we need to take a step back and see the bigger picture. We know how to do that without forging forward. Or like, that's more from my toolbox personally, but and actually this one is too, it depends on where I am, but it's like, how do I get out of bed and get the work done? Right? Like,
Yeah.
how do I slow myself down? How do I speed myself up? How do I calibrate? One of my favorite metaphors is actually, you remember the bike, our bike. I feel like it's our bike. I ride it
Our
now to
bike.
go to New York. Yes. For the I had a bike that I inherited from my mom, and Felipe used it when we lived together, and now I use it, and it's a great bike, and like no one would ever steal it because it's not a fancy bike, but it's like it's got a lot of gears. And so to stay in a constant state of flow, you are not going at the same speed. You are, or actually, never mind, to go at the same speed, messing up my metaphor that I love so much. To keep a constant state of flow, you have to constantly be shifting your gears.
Yes.
And you have to find what your personal metronome is, and know what rhythm you beat at, and know how to slow it down, and know how to speed it up, and know how
Yes.
to play legato and staccato when you need to meet that sort of external environment at a different pace.
Yes.
And I think this is such a powerful practice to do that, and I think it's also powerful to mix it with other methods.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's like one of the greatest things I ever got from one of the trainings I did with Naveen in Bedford Hills was she was like, all we know is our material. By virtue of you coming here with a technique underneath your belt, you're already enhancing our material, and that's, I mean, like that's really the whole point of like knowledge. It's like it's not held in one place, and I think that's really different from like a lot of places that talk about like sequencing and like how to do things. It's really sort of centered around like brand. It's like, oh, this is how we do it, this is, and almost a narrative about like this is the only way to do it. And I think that from our experience and conversations, it's like the more movement practices and modalities we learn, the more we can incorporate it into what we're doing, so that like we just stay, again, like having all the tools to keep the gears shifting so that we're flowing, being dynamic, even
Yeah.
when you're still.
Yes. Yeah. And in my experience studying different things, I study, even like we were talking about this before, I do a little Pilates, or a lot, actually do a lot. That's what I mostly teach in person now. I don't know if I've ever stated that, but I do most of my online stuff is yoga, in person is Pilates. And I still teach yoga as well, but just and incorporate stuff from my personal training background and all that I've studied with functional anatomy. And it's just I have a lot of different places to start a conversation with people too, right? And also to engage and interact with people, with the chairs, with knowing some things about different disciplines, and even in my own like my more extracurricular practices, movement practices, like that are more like fitness based or dance based, or even just like walking. I mean, like, seriously, it's everyone, most people do it. And it's a movement that in a way measures our function. It's very simple, it's accessible, but like I'm just meaning by that, it doesn't have to mean you have to engage in a bunch of things that are going to cost money. You can get insights from this practice with everything that you do, as simple from walking, as simple as you just interacting with other people.
Yes.
And the more you sort of cross reference the theory with other things that you do, and I really think this is a testament to some of the integration of Taoist principles, it really becomes more powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you a very um, metaphysical concept to apply to the physical experience of the world, right? And when you have that connection, that's what I think makes it meditation and ritualistic,
Hmm.
right? When those two aspects are really connected, I think that's really what yoga is. And that's, what a good practice will give you, or tools of empowerment to be in accord with your inner nature and outer nature.
Hmm. Beautiful. I love it. I love it. So I have a couple more questions.
Yes.
Um, how do you incorporate the material?
How do I incorporate the material? Well, it depends on who I'm teaching. I recently moved to the Los Angeles area 2 years ago, and Katonah Yoga is not really, um, I mean, it's known, but it's not as popular or well known as it is like on the East Coast or in Europe. And so I really had to change the way I was using the material. In New York, I did a lot of like esoteric dialogue and using metaphors and realizing that some of that is too heady. And so when I started teaching here in Los Angeles, it became very practical and functional. So it was really about like patterns in the body that people could tangibly grasp and introducing like one aspect, because I think that's something you really understand from the theories, is that it's so layered and nuanced. You can spend a lot of time on one small perspective of the practice, and so I would sort of introduce fundamental things and then start to layer on top of it. And as my students continue to, I hate the word condition, but learn, like then you could start to elaborate more on the thought, on the question, on the narrative.
Mhm.
And so I use that and incorporate it into mostly vinyasa sequences, sometimes like hatha formats, but mostly vinyasa sequences. In addition, I also like, I've been doing a lot of PT work on myself. And so seeing how the theory can be implemented in the things and the knowledge that I'm learning in that framework too has been really, really great. And also I use it in a lot in how I like show up to my life, like I think about the different maps and metaphors that can help me, like you said, like organize a direction and where my life is going, or find the drive to follow through on tasks, and to understand patterns that you have, and then to either play out those patterns or to change those patterns.
Mhm.
I'm very good at initiating and starting things, and I have a really hard time following through. And that pattern played out in so many different aspects of my life until I had the awareness of like I suck at the follow through.
Mhm.
And once you have that insight, it's like, okay, well then maybe you don't follow through every time, but at least you're aware of it now, um and so that then in turn is infiltrated into my teaching. It's like, oh, I have a thought, an idea, like finish the thought. Don't walk in with a half thought idea, let it be completed.
Mhm. Yeah, it gives you the space for the insight
Yes.
and the ability. I like how you said, like, you're either gonna go with it or you're gonna change it. And you first step, I think, is like when you recognize it, you don't doesn't mean you're gonna change it all the time. Like you don't have to change, right?
Yeah.
It just gives you the space to become more cognizant of who you already are, right? And maybe you don't need to change at all,
Yeah.
right? And
Maybe
it's
that
just
pattern's working,
right.
and the repeating of that pattern is over long term is going to change.
Right. Exactly. And so I think like there's also a place where you can really find, and I'm using place like thinking of the body as a house, the body as a home in motion. There's a place where you can find the ability to be okay with where you are at this moment and to not move away from it, right? To be in that state of flow, sometimes you have to take a step back to be really present and recognize the interworkings of the moment, right? If like how you are meeting the moment, with follow through, it's like what are the triggers? Like I know here, like I like to put up tasks like laundry. So, I could do that and it's fine. I'll get it done. But then, if I trick myself, or not trick myself, but if I know, okay, if I do it first, then it'll be done with and I won't have to think about it. Like, and that's a very concrete example of things being very using this practice to up the function in life, because when the laundry's done, the clothes are clean, I don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, okay, my first nature is to like put off that until the last minute. But having a technique to overcome that first nature allows me to up the function of my days. And it's sometimes upping the function of your life is not that exciting, right? It's about laundry, it's about tasks, it's about like how to mediate your outputs and inputs so that you have enough gas in your tank to get you where you need to go. It's not
Yes.
sometimes as big as like opening your heart to a new big world, right? Or like you have to throw out, or you have to let go of something huge in your practice. You
Yeah.
might get there, and the baby steps will get you there,
Right.
but it doesn't have to be cathartic. It's really
You literally
insightful.
took the words out of my mouth. It's like, this is a practice for insight, not catharsis, And I think, and like especially in like a lot of like the Taoist principles, like balance and mediation is simplicity,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the joy and the bliss is in its simplicity. The joy is in the transitory nature of life. And to put yourself in the middle of that, then it's like, oh my God, like you have the aha, and it's not like song and dance and like, like, and you understand that like when moments are like that, it's great, and when moments are like terrible, but that you've got something to regulate so that you can come back to like the simplicity of being,
Mm-hmm.
an embodied practice. I think that's really the ultimate goal of all of this is to be so at home in your body.
Mm-hmm.
When you were like moving home, I was like, a mobile home.
Yeah, that's going to be the new magic square, the mobile home.
The mobile home.
Or our new map for the
Our
mobile
new
home.
metaphor.
Our new metaphor will be mobile homes and bicycles.
I like
New
it.
vehicles of transformations. I was like, not a mobile home, but I was like one of the, what are they, it's slipping my mind what you call like the RV, recreational vehicles. I
Like
was
a
like, that's really
Winnebago.
fun to do that,
Yeah.
like take off and drive to see you. That would be so fun. Forgot where we were recently. I was like, honey, I think we should maybe get a recreational vehicle.
That's
Like, I
hilarious.
don't know where we would park it, but
Fine. We can move it.
you can you can move it. There was something that you had mentioned that I wanted to get back to from before. Um, in talking about, now I'm like trying to find it. There's this great article, I'll have to post it in the notes here, about like, or not article, Instagram post. I think there might have been an article attached to it, but it was like somebody was it was like a psychologist talking about how and are often like interpreted as like, if somebody's like no-nos and they have a negative connotation, but it's really like a positive sign that someone's taking that time
Yeah.
to really assess the moment and assess their thoughts and being very thoughtful in their communication. So like, I thought that was really, really insightful. And now, of course, I'll when you talk more, I'll get back to what I wanted to.
Sounds
Oh, I
good.
got it. I got it. So you alluded to this a little bit when you talked about moving to LA,
Yeah.
but any obstacles in teaching the material, and you talked about that a little bit, or a lot actually, and I thought that was really helpful, that there's that permission to simplify, right? And
Yes.
to like know that the structure of the practice is based on simple concepts. And one of the concepts that I know we both turn to a lot is this idea of centering. And you alluded to this earlier in the conversation too, about how the center is always moving. It's always in the mobile home or the bicycle or the car or the house. And I think that's a really big sort of different way of looking at center, because I think like center, even physically, we think of it as holding and
Holding.
gripping, and like the center doesn't hold. And I'm that's like paraphrasing Joan Didion, who I think paraphrases John Keats there. Um, and that I think is really important, that it's something we have to learn how to come back to. Like, how boring is it to just hold your center and just
Yeah.
stay there the whole time? Like, to be adventurous, to take risks, is to know that you're stepping out. The practice is to know how to come back
Yeah.
and to know how to step out again, to constantly go through that cycle of stepping out, doing things, having insight and learning from it and learning from the process, because that's really always setting yourself up as a teacher or practitioner in a place of curiosity. And curiosity will keep you open to the context of the moment and how you might see things differently. And we see this culturally. We're always evolving how we see things through the cultural zeitgeist,
Hmm.
and always coming to things from different frames of references and inviting different viewpoints in. Okay, I think at the end there, I was like, I went on a little too long. That's another conversation. Another
Bookmark that.
bookmark that. So, any other thoughts on difficulties with teaching the material?
One of a great Instagram post I saw like I think it was like last year or the year before, was a yoga teacher saying, you don't have to share everything you know about yoga in one yoga class. And I think sometimes especially in a field where there is a lot of woo and a lot of misinformation that is perpetuated, it can feel like you want to be an authority on what you're saying. So you want to like give as much information as you can to make it look like you know a lot. But, being able to articulate something in a simple way so that people can get it is really the skill of like a great teacher. And, being able to then put all of the simple pieces together in motion to make it complex, but without losing the functionality of the simplicity, gives you permission to do less, right? And to trust the practice and the material more, right? Like it's actually pretty liberating to be like, oh, the soul like authority of yoga doesn't fall on my shoulders, right? Like and I don't have to share everything I know about the hip joint to help someone access a forward fold, right? And I think that that's what makes teaching then fun and nuanced, because you start to play with saying and exploring things differently, but really in the same space, in the same body, in the same house. And I think that that helps people have space for their own experience, because like I have a real, like, again, mediation of like, how much guidance do you give in a yoga practice and how much space do you have for people to have their own experience. And like, you don't want to completely leave people to their own devices, because that's why they're there in the first place, right? But you also don't want to be like a drill sergeant where people don't want to come explore things with you because you don't give them the space to, and to um give the space so that, like, it's still a collective experience, but there's a lot of personal exploration within that collective activity.
Yeah, I think that's a really important skill for a teacher to develop, that balance. It's something that I think it like every room is different, every person is different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also when you walk into a room that people are coming to you is different than when you are going to them. And what I mean by that is, if there's a difference between like teaching a transient class at a gym where there's a lot of people you don't know. And by the way, we both started our yoga practice at gyms. And so
And
I
still
still
teach at
teach at, we
gyms.
still teach at gyms. I mean, it's a great way to really open up the practice to new people, then give them the tools that they might find helpful. If they do, some people are going to walk in and walk out and not come back, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Right. We're not going to be everybody's teacher, but at the same time, piggybacking on what we were just talking about, like that doesn't give you the license to be arrogant. Right. And so learning how to mediate, giving information, giving people space to really use that information and get something out of it is something that is a skill that has to be developed. I think that metaphor is a great tool to help people access some of this material. And I think that's why we both love this practice, because there's the metaphors that are used sort of in the vernacular that we all know, but there's the invitation to cross-reference other metaphors and, to really work with numbers in a way. And I think like this has been an obstacle too. I think some students and some people for really good reasons, can shut off from numbers, right? And just like that, that's like, oh, I didn't want, it's numbers are associated with a part of our life that is not really, doesn't really bring up thoughts of relaxation and meditation, right? Like, okay, now I got to do math in my yoga practice. What are you talking about? But it's a universal language, and you can use the metaphors of numbers without saying a single number.
Yeah.
Right. One is dropping in and a seed, and two is dialogue, and three is surface and mediation and triangulation, and four is creating a framework, creating boundaries, and five is the ability to center yourself, and six is taking a step out into the world, and seven is worldly follow through, and eight is embodied follow through, and nine is the ability to see past your own experience in the moment, and 10 is the one in another dimension. So that was just the magic square real quick.
No, listen, I mean, I think it's a beautiful way of understanding, again, the relationship between the esoteric and the practical, and how you use cultural references to help people access the archetypal, right? You use things that will pique the imagination, that will bring people into ultimately what is a human experience, which we're all individually having, and that's the paradox. It's like we're all the same, yet we're all different.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all going to use the same tools and techniques in different ways.
Right,
you know
right. We all have the same toolbox.
Yeah.
And some of us are going to need to hone different ones than others. And self-awareness gives us the opportunity to figure that out.
Absolutely.
And yeah. So what are, we have a mentorship coming up, and we realized that this video will be around, or if you might be listening to this on audio too, will be around way past than when we do the mentorship. But I do want to talk a little bit about what you're excited about in the mentorship, and there'll be chances to work with us to pass just this coming up mentorship, which is March 18th through April 15th, 4 Saturdays from 11 to 1:30 p.m. The full immersive mentorship, words are so similar, comes with 4 private sessions, two with Felipe and 2 with Mary Dana. I'll say that again: 2 with Felipe, 2 with Mary Dana, and that will help you work. The idea of those is to help you hone and work on a specific project or corner of the theory that you want to develop an understanding of a little bit more. You want to know how to use it. You want to, you want to work with it. And our 4 meetings will cover some of the topics that we talked about today and really get into the toolbox a little bit more and how to share these tools with people, and also how to integrate it with what you already teach, what you already know. You don't have to throw things out. It can exist in really a beautiful world with everything else that you do. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on the mentorship and working together again.
I think that I'm so excited to do this again, and repetition consciously creates refinement. And I think for me, what I'm really excited to share is how to really to take this material and use it in a way that's applicable to your lived experience, and then that's where you teach from. Because I think it's so important that like, at least for me, like, you can tell when somebody is really connected to what they're saying and inspired by what they're saying, and you can tell when someone is kind of phoning it in or regurgitating something
Mhm.
that they've heard somebody else say without really understanding it. And I think that what I'm excited to share is how, my time in Los Angeles, being away from like my community and my teachers that I see on the regs, forced me to really cultivate and develop my own exploration in a way that was authentic to me as a teacher. And that's invaluable. And understanding how that is the basis of where you teach from, but it's not exactly what you teach. And I think that that is something I'm really excited to share in this mentorship, about how to start to create frameworks and structures that you can use as templates to reference and then play. I think to give yourself permission to play and explore, so that when you walk into the room, that's what you're giving your students: permission to play and explore. But if you're trying to figure it out or you don't really get it, then it's going to resonate. It's going to
Yeah.
like be um felt.
Yeah. And I think too, on, I think sometimes when we love material as teachers and we love learning from other teachers and their language seeps into our language, it can be a beautiful thing when it becomes a conversation between what you've learned and how you understand it and then how you teach it. It's like a trinity. You absorb it, you comprehend it, and then you put it out into the world, or absorb it, sit with it, and then put it out into the world. I think what sometimes is missing, and again, I don't love that word because it's more like it's not missing, it's just maybe the insight isn't there. It's like there's this skipping of that comprehension, right? It's like, this sounds good when that person teaches it and I love it and I'm just going to say it, right, without it being experienced in the
Yeah.
body. And then
They
like it becomes a little dogmatic.
and too theoretical, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to um a practical
Right.
experience, right?
Right.
They bypass the pathway of embodiment. It just goes from absorbing to regurgitation, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to absorbing, integration, teaching.
Right. And in a way, like, to bring it back to using sort of the simple concepts of math that we use, like then it's just linear, it's a line, right? When you're regurgitating, it doesn't have surface, like when you play with that mediation. And if you're listening to this conversation, I'm like using my hands to draw these like things. I drew a line and then a triangle, because when you have 3 points, then it's the first time that you play with surface.
Mhm.
Right. And then surface leads to framework and it leads to dimension. Like you're starting to play with more. And we'll have all those handouts and whatnot in the training and go over them, or in the mentorship. I'm really excited to work with you again. I think that it was so great last year, and it's just been great to keep, even though we are on different sides of the country now, that we've kept our collaboration and our relationship going. And I'm just really grateful for you for that. And I love learning from you. And this conversation has been wonderful.
I'm so grateful for everything, that our relationship, your mentorship and teaching, and also the ability to stay connected digitally,
Yeah.
because it's again, like a great way to cross-reference,
Yeah.
it's like, again, it's putting the theory into practice, right? So I'm super excited for our mentorship, excited to work with you again, and it's going to be a really great experience.
Excellent. And just so the people watching this later, where can we find you? And even now, like, where can we
Yeah.
find you besides this mentorship? Tell us about what you're doing.
So I also teach on the MDY platform, a virtual practice once a week. So if you are not based in the Los Angeles area, you can always practice with me on Dana Yoga. Um, I co-opened a studio here in Los Angeles. It's on the west side, called Empowered Yoga Studio. It is a great space with again, diverse background of teachers, but all a lot of experience and a lot of study and learning has gone into their careers, and it's really a chance to explore different modalities, different movement styles, and a great way to be in community. So if you're in Los Angeles, come check us out at empoweredyogastudio.com.
I'll put that all
Yeah.
in the, when we get up, I'm going to write all the things that I have to put in the notes, and that'll be there so people can find you easily in your website and Instagram as well.
Yeah, absolutely. My
So thank
Instagram is at Yogi Gons, just so audibly people can hear
I'm gonna if I was good at video editing, which I think I'm just gonna put this on YouTube, but I put the big QR code right there so people can see your face.
it. Oh my God.
So good to talk to you, Felipe. Thank you so much, and
Thank you.
thank you for those who made it to the end of this conversation. You get a gold star.
Star.
Yes, yes. And in fact, if you made it to the end of this conversation, I'm just thinking this now, you'll get 10% off the mentorship when you use the code conversation in all caps.
Yes.
So there's a little tidbit for you. Conversation, all caps. Hope you enjoyed, everyone. Thank you.